All right, good morning. So last time I gave you a video to watch on segmenting, targeting, and positioning. We will finish talking about global marketing today, and I should have some time to talk about segmenting, targeting, and positioning for those of you who didn't get a chance to watch the video, so you will have just sort of what we need to know in terms of exam coverage for that. And then I wanted to point out that on Tuesday we'll have new products, and then on Thursday is exam 2 scheduled. So again, because the exams will be on D2L, you will not have to come to class on Thursday. So you'll have Thursday to work on the exam. I give you the class period to work on the exam. So with that, I will start with global, or finish up global marketing, and then we'll talk about let's see, products. Sorry, I got the wrong.
You can just Thursday for the exam, or is it can you take it like Thursday, Friday, or?
You have a week to take it.
Okay.
So let's see. So in terms of globalization, we were talking about the environmental scan and the political and regulatory environment. And the example that I give here, and I don't think we got to talk about this, according to my notes, I didn't talk much about the Russian example during our last time that we met, did I? I didn't give the detail. All right, so when I was growing up, after World War II, the world was basically split into what we call the bipolar model. And the Soviet Union and communism was one pole, and the United States and capitalism was the other pole. And we largely operated within spheres of influence where we tried to maintain satellite nations that were supportive of either ideology. And largely, international relations during that time period was seen as through this prism of a bipolar world. Now, the reality is that probably the world was far more fractured than we would like to have believed. But because there was this enormous power struggle between the two greatest powers to emerge after World War II, it really did influence sort of everything else in the world. Under this model, communism really rejected the tenets of sort of the American, what we might call the American dream, the American lifestyle, and we didn't have a whole lot of business dealings with those countries. Our foreign trade and foreign relations largely focused on our own sphere of influence. So we didn't do a lot of trading with the Russians and their satellites and the Chinese as a result of that. Ronald Reagan comes to power in 1980, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he may have had the onset of Alzheimer's at the end of his first term, and clearly through the second term, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he may have been suffering from that disease. He said some crazy things. By contemporary standards, they don't seem to be all that crazy. But one of the ideas that he came up with was something called, it was affectionately labeled, or maybe not so affectionately labeled, Star Wars. The idea was, after World War II, we built up this nuclear arsenal, and the Russians built up this nuclear arsenal, and the world operated, those people who had nuclear weapons, which were basically the United States, some of our allies, which were Britain, France, Israel had nuclear weapons, and the Russians and some of their satellite had nuclear weapons. And we built up these arsenals, and we operated under a principle which was crazy in thought, and even the name of it is sort of crazy. It was called MAD, which stood for Mutually Assured Destruction. And the idea was that we would never launch missiles against the Soviet Union, because if we did, we knew that they would retaliate with missiles against us, and it would lead ultimately to nuclear winter and the end of life on this planet. That model worked for a long time. Reagan introduces, and the reason this is important is because it ultimately leads to the downfall and my illustration of globalization. Reagan introduces this idea. He comes up with the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was called, or not necessarily so affectionately called, Star Wars. And the idea was that we were going to be able to intercept and stop missiles from the Soviet Union coming into the United States, which meant that we would have enormous offensive capability to strike the Russians and their satellites without any retaliatory effects. This changed the balance of power. Scientists at the time did not think, American scientists at the time did not think that this was technically capable, that there was a technical possibility of this working at that point in our development. Now remember, supercomputers in the 1980s were very different than supercomputing today, and the mathematics that go into things that are much, much more complex than, but they didn't really think it would work. But the Russians thought that it might work. He had the Russians convinced that it might work. And so they opened up, and really a guy comes to power named Mikhail Gorbachev. He realizes that the Soviet economy can't compete with this, that it's been behind all this time, and so he starts to open up and normalize relations more so with the West. We had some relations. Nikita Khrushchev, for example, came, and there's a theory out there that he saw American supermarkets, and that was really the end, the downfall, or the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, because they couldn't imagine anything like this, where you go into a store and the average store has something like 500,000 SKUs, right? They couldn't imagine that kind of thing. But Star Wars certainly pushed them over the edge. So they started to open up. And as a result, lots of Western investments, lots of Americans started doing business in Russia. I mean, it became very, very fashionable to do business. The Russian Empire and the Soviet Union falls. Mikhail Gorbachev loses office. The Communist Party sort of loses prominence. And Boris Yeltsin is elected, and he opens up the Russian economy more to capitalism. And all kinds of stuff occurs. Then Vladimir Putin comes to office after Boris Yeltsin. He's Yeltsin's handpicked successor, and he really starts to tamp down. He realizes that a lot of this investment is not necessarily good for his own people and his own friends and his own oligarchs, and so he starts to tamp down. And one of these American investors that was in Russia at the time, he's written a book called Red Notice, gets charged with a crime. His attorney that's trying to defend him, he leaves Russia, and Russia puts out a red notice on this guy, which means that he's supposed to be picked up and brought back. And of course, none of the Western nations agree to this. And his attorney in Russia is ultimately prosecuted by the Russian state and killed. And that leads to something called the Magnitsky Acts, which target Russian oligarchs and their assets in the West. So what's happened is we went from not being able to do business in Russia, with one exception. There was a guy named Armand Hammer, who was the president of Occidental Petroleum, and his plane was the only Western plane that was allowed to land in Moscow during the Cold War, and he did business sort of with the Russians. There were very few people like that. He was the only one that I think had landing privileges in Moscow during that period of time. To having it really open up to capitalism, to now, as a result of a trade war and these Magnitsky Acts, it being very tenuous for American businesses to do business over there, right? So understanding these political climates and the political stability and how that can change is going to be really critical if you want to engage in global trade and global business. Trade regulations, understanding those kinds of things. So American manufacturers of pharmaceuticals, we manufacture or we develop, they're actually manufactured mostly in China now, but we develop the drugs largely. In the United States, those are advertised, and the way you get consumers to know about those is through direct consumer advertising on television, social media, things like that, of all kinds of drugs like Prozac, Zoloft, even heartburn medications, Prilosec, all of that. Other nations don't allow you to do that. The only other nation that allows direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical products is New Zealand. And so understanding the regulations. So how are you going to have to, if you launch a new drug, if you're AstraZeneca, or your Pfizer, or any of these other companies, how are you going to have to engage in global trade? Well, you're going to have to do it historically the way they did in the United States before advertising of these drugs became really popular. which is through basically sales reps going out to doctors and getting doctors to be aware of the drugs and then prescribing them, rather than making patients aware of the drugs and having the patients then go to their doctor and say, I think I would like to try Prozac, right? That doesn't happen in other countries. So understanding those kinds of regulations and how you can market things. Another example is that in Europe, in most European countries, McDonald's can't include toys in the Happy Meals because they view that as sort of manipulative of children. And so you can't engage in that. Also, advertising for McDonald's in other countries. How do they advertise in the United States? Well, the golden arches are sort of ubiquitous across the American landscape. In other countries, like in Germany, when I was a foreign exchange student there, McDonald's can't put up big golden arches. They can have signs, but the types of signs, and they don't have billboards across the entire Autobahn of Germany that advertise McDonald's next exit 5 miles or 5 kilometers or whatever. Since these kilometers, it would be kilometers, not miles. So how do we enter into global? When we decide we want to enter, if we're a small company or a mid-sized company, that we're going to engage in globalization and global trade, how do you do that? Well, exporting is the least risky and one of the easiest ways. You just simply send your products, you manufacture products, and you just send them to other countries. There are 2 ways you can do this. You can do this direct, which is the use of an indirect, which is the use of an intermediary in the host country, and that's the way it's historically been done. The internet has allowed for what we call, and when we talk about channels, you should remember this, and this may be a test question here as well, for what we call disintermediation, which is the elimination of what have historically been intermediaries. The internet allows us to engage directly with many, many, many products and many, many companies without having to go through a retail store, for example. And I can give you an example of this. I never thought in the early age of the internet that I would buy my shirts online. But I like French cuff shirts, and they're very difficult to find. Now, I've historically gotten them in the United States, but you had to do it in sort of interesting ways, right? You had to either have them custom made, custom ordered, or sometimes stores, Dillard's historically would carry them once a year, sort of like at Christmas time, so that I would stock up. There's a company called Charles Tyrwhitt, which manufactures, and I never thought I would buy dress shirts online, but because the cost or the risk associated with it became so much less, in that returns are easier now as a result of better postal systems and better private carriers, I buy almost all of my French cuff dress shirts from the United Kingdom and from England and from Charles Tyrwhitt. And I buy direct from the manufacturer. I don't go through an intermediary. I'm not buying through Dillard's or through Foley or Macy's or any of those other kinds of stores. Historically, you used the indirect method, which is you used an exporter who would then ship to an importer, wholesaler, who would then send it out to retail stores. You can also engage in licensing. From a financial standpoint, this is low risk and it's capital free. From an intellectual property or quality control standpoint, this can be very risky, the licensing, and it involves an awareness of the political environment. How are you going to enforce your licensing agreement? When McDonald's wanted to go overseas and start expanding into other markets, the franchising agreements, you have to be very, very careful because you don't want to get into a situation where you have a franchisee who's diluting your brand by introducing new products that you didn't approve of. This actually happened in the early days of McDonald's when they first became a big company in the United States. So there were these two brothers called McDonald's brothers who had this little hamburger stand, right? And they had this model. Their model was that they made burgers very quickly. They served a very limited menu. It was burgers, French fries, and milkshakes, right? And the way that they got big was this very unsuccessful milkshake salesman who was selling a model of milkshake machine, which would allow you to make 3 milkshakes on the same machine at one time, named Ray Kroc, visited them. These were the only people that had a big demand for his product. And he became fascinated with their business model, and he basically got them to agree to let him license this model. And he was not such a great guy. He was not really a nice guy. He screws over the McDonald's brothers, takes their name, doesn't really pay them by engaging in very shady negotiations in the licensing process, and then takes over and expands McDonald's into what has become a worldwide corporation, right? When you go into other countries, you want to make sure that they're not doing things like diluting your brand by serving stuff. And this occurred at the early McDonald's. Ray Kroc initially licenses these early McDonald's franchises to his friends. And then he starts noticing that his friends are doing things like serving tacos out of them, and they're not keeping the parking lot clean. And so he had to really tamp down on his franchise agreements to make sure that these people were following standard sort of protocol. And if you're a McDonald's franchisee now, it's basically a license to print money, but you can't just decide, I think that, we should serve margarita cherry slush at the McDonald's. They're not going to let you do that, right? That's just not going to be part of the thing. So licensing, you have to be very careful about. It's low risk in terms of capital, but it can be risky in terms of maintaining quality standards across your partners. Joint ventures where two companies share ownership and control. This has happened a lot in the automobile industry. Automobile companies often engage in joint ventures. For example, the Ford Ranger, forever and ever. If you got a Mazda pickup truck, it was exactly the same thing. That was a joint venture between Mazda and Ford. And they developed very similar products in that joint venture. Then you can have direct investment. This is the most risk, but has the highest potential rewards. The one problem with direct investment is that many nations will not allow a foreign entity or a foreign person to wholly own a company in that country. China, for example, for years and years and years, I think they've started to loosen this restriction, but you could not wholly own a company if you were a foreign citizen in China. You had to have a Chinese partner. And I believe forever, I may be wrong on this, so this is not going to be a test question, but I believe that the foreign investor could not own a majority share of the company. You had to have a Chinese citizen or a Chinese corporation that owned the majority share. So there are nations that will allow direct investment, but some countries won't. Product strategies. Creating a strategy for global trade. You can have a product extension, which is virtually selling the same product in other countries. If you go to China, Coca-Cola is the same in China as it is in the United States. The only real difference is the lettering, they use Chinese characters and script, I believe, on the Coca-Cola cans and bottles, but the packaging almost other than that, is identical. The Coca-Cola symbol, the red field with the white wave, is the trademark that they use in other countries, and so there's almost no variation. Then you can have a product adaptation. In the United States, Tupperware designed this product that kept bread fresh. How does bread come in the United States in most instances? Well, we sell sliced bread, right? Loaves of sliced bread. That's not the way most other countries make bread, by the way. Most other countries make bread in round loaves as opposed to sort of oblong loaves. When Tupperware wanted to come up with a device that would keep bread fresh in India, they had to adapt and make it a round container rather than an oblong container for sliced bread. You can create a new product for the market, a product invention for that market. McDonald's in India doesn't serve beef. So they've come up with product inventions. It's still like a Big Mac, but it doesn't contain a beef patty. In terms of promotional strategies, you're going to have to use the environmental scan to understand what the culture and context and language and things like that are that you're going to have to be dealing with. And so to develop your promotional strategies, things that work in the United States don't necessarily work in other places. We work the longest work year of any nation except for Japan. Japan has about the same length of work year. Other nations don't have that. And so when you want to think about, for example, selling helicopters in South America, which one of my colleagues in the doctoral program, before she went into the doctoral program, that's what she did. She was a salesperson for Sikorsky helicopters, and they were trying to sell them in South America. And they used a similar ad campaign in South America that just didn't go over well because their whole marketing campaign in the United States is this is the ultimate product for the executive on the go who's busy, busy, busy. That didn't work in South American countries, and they had to come up with a different promotional strategy. Distribution strategies, channels. Coca-Cola is distributed on motorcycles and tricycles in India because they don't have the same kind of infrastructure that we have in this country. They don't have large roads, 4-lane highways, and wide boulevards, right, that we have in the United States, which are conducive to tractor-trailer rigs. They have smaller streets, more crowded, and a lot more people and more traffic and congestion. And so the distribution had to change for Coca-Cola when they went into, for example, India in their initial foray into that market. Any questions about globalization? Nope. All right, so I am going to talk about, even though you watched the videos, I'm going to just touch on marketing, segmentation, targeting, and positioning since we have time. And then again, on Tuesday, we'll talk about new products, and then we'll have the second exam on Thursday. So if we went back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, before the Industrial Revolution, goods and services were largely custom made, right? I mean, you went to a tailor and they made shirts, or you went to a tailor and they made a suit of clothes. They were largely custom. They were small production scales. They didn't have large scale production, so lots of things were custom. Then we get the Industrial Revolution, and the idea is that we can produce, that people are basically the same, and we can produce mass amounts of goods, and people will buy them, that they don't really need to be individualized that much. And of course, the historic example here is the Ford Model T. It's so much better than the horse and buggy. It's enclosed, it's got a roof. If you're relying on the horse to get around, what's wrong? Well, in Oklahoma, how many days is it really pleasant to ride a horse around? Well, in the spring, we have lots of rain, and torrential downpours. This product now provides a covering, and so you're willing to accept it even though it's not highly customized, right? Because it's better than the alternative. After we start seeing more and more people enter into the market, differentiation becomes important. And today, differentiation may be the most important word in marketing. Everything is differentiated, even things that have historically been commodities, and commodities are generally things that we don't think of as being differentiated, are differentiated at this point. When I was a kid growing up, and I think I've used this example before with you all, but again, sort of redundancy is good, it impresses it on your mind. When I was a kid growing up, milk was milk. There were really not very many varieties. Most milk was vitamin D, whole milk. There were sort of two exceptions. You could get skim milk, which was just god awful, right? I mean, it's all of the fat taken out of the milk, so it's like this watery substance that's just not much like milk. And then they'd come out with a product which was dehydrated milk, and I think dehydrated milk was largely developed, as I recall, it was developed so that you could get this protein product to the front lines in war zones. And if you've ever had it, I actually had a student this morning in class tell me that he tried powdered milk. They still make it, and it's disgusting. It's a disgusting product. You add water to it, and it rehydrates it, and it's not good. Trust me. But milk today is not just milk. We have 1% milk, 2% milk. We have lactose-free milk, right? We have chocolate milk that you can buy. You have strawberry milk that you can buy in a bottle it's flavor-added milk. There's products that are not really milk that they call milk, right? There's the stuff that they call soy milk. It's really soy juice, because the last time I checked, soy plants can't lactate, so it's not really milk, it's soy juice. But soy juice doesn't sound very appealing, does it? So they call it milk. I don't think soy milk tastes anything like milk, but it's better than water. I remember as a kid, I liked cereal and milk. I ate lots and lots of milk and cereal. And I remember one morning my father had forgotten to get milk on his way home. And I got up, I always got up at 5 a.m. And so I was starving to death, no milk in the house, cereal. And I thought, well, water's is good, that'll take it. And it was absolutely horrific. Using water with Frosted Flakes is just not good, right? But there are now all of these substitutes for milk. There's lots of differentiation among them. Why do we have lots of differentiation? Well, let's take the milk example. Most people are slightly lactose intolerant, and some people are grossly lactose intolerant. I have a friend who, if he has any amount, I mean, even like butter on toast, it creates a awful reaction for him. I mean, he is like vomiting, throwing up, kind of sick. But I'm slightly lactose intolerant, so I like milk, and I like cereal. So they've come up with a product that is milk that they've taken the lactose out, and it's great. The first time I tried it, I was like, because I'm one of these people that once I start on a bowl of cereal, it's not one bowl of cereal, I'll have 8 bowls of cereal. I mean, I just like cereal and milk. But after 8 bowls of cereal, I'm pretty sick. And so you get this product, this lactose-free milk, and you've got, the problem solved, right? So we've got all these different products. So to appeal to different needs in the market, this realization that one size doesn't fit all, really. So what are market segments? Market segments are the aggregation of consumers into groups that have common needs and will respond similarly to a marketing action. So people who are lactose intolerant, who like milk, would probably be a good candidate for lactose-free milk, right? Those of us who like milk and cereal and things like that, this is a good substitute. So we've got this common need, lactose intolerant, still like milk. Lactose-free milk is something that would appeal to that group. So market segments are homogeneous groups of prospective buyers that result from the segmentation process. So we have different segments of people, milk buyers. So who is it that wants milk and cereal? Well, even vegans, most people are, I don't know anybody who was born a vegan, right? Maybe now there are people who are born to vegan parents, but that's pretty rare, who have never had any animal product. I think most doctors would tell you that's not real healthy for the kid, and that's probably, you shouldn't do that. So let me back up. What's the difference between, there's variations. What's the difference between a vegan and a vegetarian, primarily? And I'm going to oversimplify this. Yes.
Vegans won't have any animal products, but a vegetarian might still eat eggs and use
Right.
milk and butter.
Yeah. So that's correct. Vegans will not have, and it goes so far as most vegans, if you're truly a vegan, you won't wear leather shoes, right? You won't wear leather belts. You won't wear silk, because in the words of my friend Angela, who became a vegan, that turns the silkworms into silk hordes. I'm thinking that's a level of consciousness that the silkworm doesn't have, right? But they won't use any animal products. So silk, they won't wear wool. Everything is either got to be synthetic, or you can have, what are the products that they can use? You can have cotton, flax, linen, and hemp, basically, are the things that you can wear, right? So no animal products. So, but Angela, she grew up in Oklahoma. She decided to become a vegan. I think she was very lonely in the early days of this, because this was 20 years ago. She decided to be a vegan. There are more of them now, much to my sort of horror, that this is a growing trend, that there are more vegans out there. I don't understand this obsession with no animal product. But she grew up eating milk and cereal. So what does she want as a vegan? Well, something that's not animal based at all. So almond milk or soy milk or things like that would appeal to that, because she still likes cereal, and she said that's one of the things that she missed when she decided to become a vegan. She said there are some things that you don't miss and other things that you really do. She said turkey at Thanksgiving, there is no good substitute. They've not come out with a way of making tofu really taste like turkey. She said they tried it, but it's not really very good. I don't know if it's gotten any better, but non-animal based products. So using different marketing mix activities to help consumers perceive the product as better than competing products. So I've said there's soy juice, which we've now labeled soy milk, right? That's using the marketing mix to make it seem like in the mind of consumers, like Angela, who is a vegan, that this is a substitute or it's a similar product. I don't think soy milk is at all similar. I don't think almond milk is at all similar, but some people think it is. And if you haven't had milk in a while, I guess maybe it sort of is. Which, by the way, how many almonds are in a gallon of almond milk? People think that, like, it's just hundreds of almonds. How many almonds are actually in a gallon of almond milk? Anybody know?
Listen, like 10, listen, 5.
It's a child's handful of almonds in the almond milk, right? And again, almonds don't lactate, so it's really almond juice, I guess, but it's not even really juice because almonds don't have juice. They grind the almonds up into a very fine powder that basically gives the product, and then combine it with water and emulsifiers, which make it thick, and then some flavoring. And it's really not great in my opinion. But if you're a vegan and you want cereal, I guess it's an acceptable substitute. Which, by the way, this is one of the things that I point out to my vegan friend Angela. It's like, you think this is all about being environmental and sustainability. Do you know how many gallons of water it takes to make one almond? One almond, not one bag of almonds, one almond. It takes over a gallon of water to make one almond. Where do they produce almonds largely? In states that have no water, like California, right? So I'm not sure how environmentally sustainable you're being there. I forget to, gotta remember to give people ducks. So, different products for different segments. So how can we segment the, somebody said veganism widely emerged as a result of environmental issues. Yes, and as I just pointed out, some of those environmental things that we think are environmentally sustainable maybe are not. But again, we'll talk about this when we talk about, so that's a good comment, because perception is reality in the mind of the consumer, right? So how do we segment markets? How can we segment markets? Well, we can have one product with multiple segments. So for example, magazine covers change for different regions of the country. Sports Illustrated, for example, in the South would have different sports that are popular as opposed to like Sports Illustrated for places where they play hockey, right? You can have multiple products and multiple segments. So for example, you can have SUVs, cars, trucks, crossovers for different segments. Or you can have mass customization of products, which is Dell. So you used to order Dell computers and online or over the phone, and they would customize it according to the type of processor you want, the suite of software that you wanted, and all the other types of bells and features that you wanted. So you could have on one product multiple segments. You can have multiple products with multiple segments, and then you can engage in mass customization. And more, we're engaging more and more in mass customization of products. And I've shown you the M&Ms, the My M&Ms, where you can customize them. On one of our extended class says, on Netflix, they change icons on your page to match the movies. Yeah, that's an example of dynamic mass customization that's done with artificial intelligence. So we're even able to, with things like that, use artificial intelligence to customize. So Netflix now, based on the movies that you watch, it will suggest movies that you might be interested in, right? And your phone does the same thing based on the icon, based on the apps that you download and the products that you buy and things like that, the way you use it and geolocation, they can mass customize suggestions for you in terms of places that you might want to go and things that you might want to do. So in segmenting, how do we do that? How do we group potential buyers into segments? Well, the way we do it is going to depend on how much and how sophisticated we are in terms of the company and how much you need to how many different categories you need to come up with. And so the criteria that we look at when we talk about wanting to segment are simplicity and cost effectiveness. So there are very easy, quick, dirty ways to segment a market. I gave you examples of this before. I think I told you in class that when I was in the doctoral program in Las Cruces, New Mexico, they asked students in elementary schools where they were most likely to see a boat, and students in Las Cruces said they were most likely to see a boat on a highway. Why is that? Las Cruces is in the middle of a desert, and the closest water source where you could put a boat, because the Rio Grande is not really conducive to boats, particularly at that location, is Elephant Butte, which is about 100 and something odd miles north. So kids see boats going to Elephant Butte or someplace else on the highway. As a result, the Yamaha dealer in Las Cruces doesn't sell a whole lot of personal watercraft. They do sell a whole lot of side-by-sides and quads and other kinds of dirt bikes that you can use out in the desert. So, geography is one way of segmenting. But the criteria that we're going to use is simplicity, cost effectiveness. How is it going to increase our return on investment? If we go through really sophisticated segmentation, is that really going to increase our ROI, or is it going to increase sales or things like that? Depending on the similarity of the needs of the potential buyers, how different the needs are among different segments that you can come up with, and then the potential marketing action for each segment that you can reach. So there are very simple ways to segment, and there are more complex depending on thinking about these criteria. So how can we do this? We can use geographic, as I suggested with Yamaha. They're selling a lot of quads, a lot of side-by-sides, a lot of dirt bikes. In Las Cruces, they're not selling a lot of personal watercraft. We can do it by demographics. This is also an easy, quick, and dirty way of doing it. You can appeal to different ethnic groups, right, that have different needs. So, for example, People magazine, which was very popular until recently when all magazines have started to lose popularity, had a Latino edition to appeal to that segment of society. I think they also had an African American edition at one time. You can appeal to age. Older people need different things than we do, right? As you get older, your needs in terms of medicine and medical care increases. And so that's one way that you can quickly segment. If you have a large population that's getting older, what are you going to need more of? Well, you're not going to need a whole lot of pediatricians in that area in terms of doctors and medicine. So that's easy to segment. More sophisticated ways are psychographics, using vowels to identify segments and break people into segments, and then behavioral or usage rates, which are more sophisticated ways of segmenting. So then we can use the products, we can group products to be sold into categories. For example, store layout and organization is one way that we can use segmentation. So when you go into a department store, for example, what do they've got? They've got, active wear, formal wear, things like that for different things. Developing a marketing grid and then estimating the size of markets is going to be important. So we can put markets on a horizontal row and then products on a vertical row, and then we can estimate size and develop for each of the cells on the grid in order to make it efficient and utilize segmentation to our advantage. So what are the challenges in doing this? Now that I've said that we should be doing this, what are some of the challenges that occur from doing this? Well, there are a number of challenges, right? So we can develop, and I used to do a critical thinking challenge on this, and I would say, for example, develop a marketing grid for an iPhone, and obviously I developed this slide at a time because I put an iPhone 7, and that was the most recent addition at that time. What are we now at? We're now at the 11, right? So if we think about it in terms of an iPhone, so the iPhone 7 had a 32 gig, a 128 gig, and a 256 gigabyte. Who would be most likely to use the 256 gigabyte if we're just thinking about this?
A business?
Huh?
A business?
You think a business would? Why a business?
I don't know, they save more, like if there, for example, if there's like a lot of files that they go through, like apps or something.
So you think a business executive might use the larger size? How about people who use their iPhones so I've got one student who is a social media marketer, right? So creating lots of videos and things like that requires an enormous amount of storage unit. So app developers, yeah, I think someone who's using an app developer might be as an app developer, might use larger storage capacities. Apple then decided that they were going to collapse the memories, and I don't know if they went back to on the 11. How many sizes do there's a video of how many sizes they have on the 11? What they found out, and this is an example, is Apple found out that really most people tended to go towards this. Most people have no idea. When you buy an iPhone, the average user has no idea what they're going to use in terms. So most people, as a result of what I call the McDonald's effect, McDonald's has trained us to think in terms of small, medium, large, right? Which is one of the reasons that Starbucks is a tool of the devil, because they've attempted to change the taxonomy, right? Starbucks has a tall, which is short. I mean, their taxonomy makes no, I mean, aside from the fact that they want to change the taxonomy, which is well established, their taxonomy makes no sense, right? They have a tall, which is short. They have a grande, which is not grand. And then they have a venti, and nobody knows what the hell that means, right? What is it? Well, venti it's from the Latin word, and it's also in Spanish 20, right? Which is 20 ounces. So they actually collapsed the market. So we can segment. So one of the challenges in segmenting is to segment to just the right amount. Right? If you have too many choices, you may get, some customers out here that really want, strawberry flavored almond, soy, frappuccino milk, right? Something like that. But it's not necessarily going to have a really huge market. So targeting. Once we've divided the market into segments, we're going to choose the segments that we want to target. So how are we going to choose those? Well, we're going to think about things like market size. Most people want to get as many as they can, the largest market share. But that's not always the case. Does Rolex want to have the largest market share of the watch market? No, Rolex does not want to have the Rolex is an exclusive brand. They want to remain exclusive, so they're going to not target everybody. Timex targets everybody, right? What's the expected growth? What is our competitive position in the market? What is the cost of reaching the market? And then is it compatible with the organization's objectives and resources? And then using the marketing mix to take marketing action once we've selected those segments to which we want to make our appeal. Which then leads us to positioning. Positioning is the image you create in the mind of the consumer of your product. So once you've selected the segments that you're going to target, how do you create a position in the mind of the consumer that will reach those segments and get you what you want? And the example that I use here is McDonald's, right? And because once you decide the segments that you want to go after, and once you establish that market and you then make your position known, it becomes very difficult to change that position. So McDonald's, Ray Kroc, steals from the McDonald's brothers, really, this idea of making fast, cheap, and consistent food. That's what McDonald's is, right? Fast, cheap, consistent. People didn't go to the McDonald's brothers because they wanted a fine dining experience. They didn't even have, the McDonald's brothers, it was a walk-up stand in terms of their restaurant. You walked up to the window and they served three things: a burger, French fries, and milkshakes. That was it, right? You told them how many burgers you wanted, how many things of fries, and whether you wanted a milkshake. So McDonald's builds on this. Ray Kroc starts this and he makes it an international global company. And it's expanded, you can now go into McDonald's and sit down and things like that. They actually designed McDonald's seats to be uncomfortable so that you wouldn't stay. That McDonald's didn't want you hanging around. Although they did create a playland for kids, right? So that parents would have a place to bring their kids, and that was wildly popular for a long time. One of McDonald's largest, so McDonald's has this huge market share of the fast food industry. Why do people go to McDonald's? When you're traveling, particularly with kids, McDonald's is a great place to go. You know that kids will eat it for the most part, right? It's cheap, it's fast, it's consistent. They always have clean restrooms. They have really good, if you're traveling along the interstate, McDonald's has historically had some of the best places to stop if you're a parent with kids and need to go to the restroom, So this was McDonald's market. They're one of the biggest areas historically of McDonald's business was the breakfast market, right? Breakfast is cheap to make. Eggs are really cheap, right, to make. But they started to lose market share to the tool of the devil known as Starbucks. Starbucks comes in, and Starbucks is the commoditization of coffee, but it's better than McDonald's, or it's perceived as being better than McDonald's, although in taste tests, McDonald's coffee always beats out Starbucks. But a lot of people, I like black coffee. I really, really like black coffee. I also like unsweet tea. I don't put anything in my tea, and I don't know when this started, this phenomenon of making enormously syrupy-like tea. And now, when I was a kid growing up, you'd go to a restaurant, you'd say, I want iced tea, and all tea was just unsweet, and you had to add sugar or sweetener to it. And then somewhere along the way, they decided that everything should need to be like a bottle of corn syrup, and they started selling, and now you have to differentiate. You have to say, I want unsweet tea. And half the time, they still give me sweet tea, and then I have this come apart because I don't want sugar in tea. But McDonald's coffee is better than Starbucks coffee if you just want coffee, but most people don't really like black coffee, right? Most people are not like me. They don't like black coffee. Most people want stuff in the coffee, and so Starbucks comes up with all of these, lattes and mochachinos and stuff like that. And then they started selling breakfast products, and McDonald's started to lose market share to Starbucks. So what has McDonald's decided they're going to do? Well, they've started to reposition themselves in the mind, or try to, in the mind of the consumer. They now have a McCafe menu, which includes things like what? Frappuccinos, mochas, iced coffees, lattes, things like that. The problem is that once you've decided the segments that you're going to go after, and you do this for long enough, and you establish a well thought out position in the market, it becomes very difficult to change that perception in the mind of the consumer. I have a friend, he's educated, he had got a degree from here at UCO, and he's like, when we're traveling, I'll be like, let's go to McDonald's and get coffee and sausage McMuffins. He's like, no, and he likes sausage McMuffins, except he doesn't like McDonald's sausage because he insists that Starbucks are clean, right? The food and I'm like, there's no such, Fritz, there is no such thing as clean sausage, right? And I can guarantee you that the sausage that Starbucks uses, they have a product that's very similar. It's a English muffin with sausage and cheese on it at Starbucks. And I can guarantee it's not organic sausage. And even if it were organic sausage is still a horrible product. It's great tasting, but in terms of being good for you, but in his mind, it's a far better product, and it's healthier. It's not, right? But that's the image that he has of Starbucks, and it's very difficult to change that image for McDonald's to switch. They've tried. If you look at McDonald's restaurants, they look more like the new McDonald's that they're building are not these big buildings with a playground in front. They are sort of sleek, modern. They're using rock siding, that layered rock siding and stucco and a much different design, but it's very difficult. Buick is trying to do the same thing. Forever and ever, Buick were sold to old people, or, you know, middle-aged to old people. That's who Buick appealed to. Buick is boring. And they're now trying to say that you all should be attracted to Buick. Their most recent campaign to try this is to show you how technologically sophisticated they are, that Buick comes with Alexa. And I think they're doing a horrible job, by the way, because this idea that the passenger gets in the commercial and she's like, I like your new Buick. And he's like, it's an Alexa. You're basically admitting we have a really crappy car, but hey, it's got this great, you know, this great software package to it. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to recreate in the mind of the consumer a different position for themselves. And it's enormously difficult to do. Once you've established that, once you've chosen these segments and you start to establish that position in the market, it's very, very difficult to change it. Any questions? Well, I'm finished for the day. If you feel cheated because I'm letting you go 20 minutes early, you let me know and we'll stay 20 minutes late on Tuesday.